Game controllers are based. And game controllers that come with a base are even more based. With everything going on in my life recently, I have gone back to playing with a game controller more than I've been playing on mouse and keyboard. Sorry, PC Master Race. Because like the thing is, when I do finally have an opportunity to sit down and game, it's not so that I can hop into some sweaty COD lobby and play with a mouse turned up to 20,000 DPI and click away on my green clicky keys on my keyboard. It's so that I can relax and play some casual campaign Halo, or walk through Night City and Cyberpunk, or hell, just play some Baldur's Gate. And in my experience, the casual and relaxing way that I do that is with a controller. So when 8BitDo reached out and asked if I wanted to review their Ultimate 2 wireless controller, I said, yeah. And yes, you did hear me correctly, they sent me this controller, so huge thanks to them. We'll see how they feel at the end of this review, considering I said that this is almost perfect, but we're gonna cover everything in time. First, let's just talk about when you get one of these, what comes in the box. Well, first off, of course, it comes with a controller, which I would hope so, because otherwise that'd be false advertising, but it also comes with a dock. And there's several things that I really like about this dock. Of course, it uses USB-C, which that is also a cable that is included, and the dock itself actually conveniently hides the dongle that comes with this. And we'll talk more about this dongle in a bit, because yes, it is a 2.4 gigahertz dongle, but it's got some cool tricks up its sleeve. Now, there is one thing that comes in the packaging that I'm not a big fan of. It's nothing to do with the controller or the dock or the dongle or the cable. It's the instructions, because I am just, I hate this roadmap style of instructions. It just feels like, you know, how much extra is it for 2 staples to have just a folding instruction manual? But that's a nitpick, but it is something that when I see it in packaging, I have to bring it up if I'm reviewing something that comes with that in the packaging. Anyway though, aside from the roadmap instruction manual, it's pretty much what you see is what you get on the box. You get the controller, dongle, dock, and cable. And in terms of the looks and feel for the controller, well, let's go ahead and talk about that. In terms of aesthetics, you have a couple different color options. I opted for purple because while I normally like to go for the more subtle black, or if I'm feeling adventurous, I go for white, I was feeling straight up crazy, and so I opted for purple because, well, there's a lot of things changing in my life, so why not my aesthetic tastes? And I am extremely glad I did, because this is a really, really cool shade of purple, and what's nice about it is that because of this color, it hides dirt like you would expect from like a black controller. It doesn't show it as easily as white, but yet it still has a bit of that flair of not being just a black controller. I really like it, and the off-color buttons, or I guess just gray buttons, really do help accent the entire thing. And on top of the controller being colored purple, the dock and the dongle are color matched, which I would expect the dock, but the fact that the dongle is just a nice little attention to detail. And because this does light up at the end and it is purple, it does light up purple at the end, although I'm pretty sure inside it's just a white LED. But regardless, it is cool that everything is color matched. I really do like that aesthetic choice. Sticking with the aesthetics, you may have also noticed that when you put the controller in the dock, it curves perfectly with the grips so that you have this nice, just aesthetically pleasing docked experience with the controller. And I love the fact that when you take this off of the dock, the controller wakes right up and it's fully charged and ready to go. Another nice touch for the dock is that when you put the controller on the dock and it begins charging, a subtle white light glows at the bottom of the dock to indicate that it has established a connection, it knows it's there, and it's charging. I love that. It's subtle, it's not some harsh blinking light or anything like that, it's just a nice white glow from underneath of the controller dock. Now, one aesthetic oddity that I did notice with this controller is that the 8BitDo specific buttons, the square and star, are where I would normally expect the start and select buttons to be. Those have instead been moved up and are labeled as minus and plus. So it's not a big distance in terms of difference, but it was enough that my muscle memory kept changing the lighting controls with the star button instead of pausing the game. You'll get used to it pretty quickly, but that was something that was a little odd. Oh yeah, and speaking of changing LED settings, yes, this has LED options. You can turn this on, and it has LED rings around these little joysticks, and you can go through different options either by loading them in with 8BitDo software, or you can cycle through them, like I said, with the star button, which, if you're like me, and that's normally where the start button is, you'll be doing that a lot and going, oh, that's what that does. Whoops. There are a couple different modes that you can use with these LED rings, including Fire Ring. They call the other one Rainbow Ring, which is either a full set of solid colors if you're using the software, or you can actually change each individual LED around the ring. So, of course, I immediately made a monstrosity of colors. And then there's my personal favorite, which is light tracing, where essentially every input on the controller is matched with some kind of illumination on the LED rings. So for example, if you press the face buttons, you'll see lights come on. You can see the LEDs turning up and down based on trigger pulls, and they also match the movement of the analog sticks. I really like this, and what I did was actually set it up so that all the LEDs are off when you're not pressing anything, and then when you pull the trigger or do any inputs on the controller, it lights up a specific color. It's such a cool touch, and for those of you who don't like LEDs, yes, you can of course turn them off as well. God forbid some fun LED lights get in the way of your hardcore gaming experience. Overall though, I really do like the look of this controller, and it carries over perfectly to the ergonomics. It's not too wide, it's a touch narrow, but not as narrow as I thought it would be just looking at some of the images. And in general, I definitely like the look of this controller, both in the color, in the shape, and while there were some oddities with the button placement for the 8BitDo specific ones, everything else is pretty much straightforward, which, speaking of layout, let's also talk about the rest of the layout for the controller. Well, there's no beating around the bush, it's an Xbox controller layout. You've got your offset thumbsticks with the D-pad below the left-hand thumbstick. Triggers and bumpers are in the same place as they are on Xbox and PlayStation, and you've got your X, A, B, Y buttons for the face buttons, although if you do like that sort of lower center analog stick setup, which I find awkward that you find on PlayStation, this is not going to have it. Although on the topic of the face buttons, they are pretty tactile. They're a little clickier than what I get from most other controllers. Definitely more clicky than the PS5's DualSense controller, but I'd say a little bit clickier than like a brand new Xbox Series X controller. When it comes to the thumbsticks, they are almost perfect for what I prefer. However, the one thing they missed out on was the thumbstick tops. They have the knurling around the sides for grip, but the tops, while they are convex, which I prefer, they are smooth and not textured. I prefer textured tops as well, just for better grip. This is something that I actually have on my ROG Ally that unfortunately these do not have. So while it is still completely usable and very comfortable in terms of placement and movement, just missed perfection with these joysticks. Also, when it comes to the actual movement of these thumbsticks, they are extremely smooth, and there's a reason for that we'll talk about here in a bit. But to top it off, and this is something that I did run into issues with on my ROG Ally, the actual necks or bodies, I don't know what you call them, of the thumbstick, the part where it goes from the top down to the round bit, these are supposed to be much more durable, and so far they definitely seem to be, and I've put quite a few hours into this controller, so that's nice because I did start to see those same pieces wearing out on the ROG Ally to the point where I actually ended up replacing the thumbsticks, and I also got thumbstick ring protectors. Never thought I'd have to do that in my life. Like I said earlier, the triggers and the bumpers are basically where you'd expect them on any controller, and the bumpers are great. The triggers are also great, though it is pretty hard nowadays to mess up triggers, although Nintendo still manages to do it, and I don't know how. Now the D-pad, however, is an interesting one because it has kind of the movement and mushiness of a membrane-style D-pad. However, it does have a very nice tactile click once you hit the bottom, and it is extremely smooth and extremely responsive. They said on their website that it has refined tactile feedback, and I can definitely see that. I wish there was a little less of that sort of mush feel in between the clicks, but overall, when I was testing it out, it was definitely an extremely responsive D-pad, and part of that responsiveness also ties into another feature that we'll talk about in a little bit. And there's a lot of things that I'm just postponing till later in the video, so y'all better stick around. And also, maybe stick around here on the channel if you like it, subscribe, the whole 9 yards, you know the drill. The last set of pretty standard buttons that you have on this controller are, of course, the center buttons. You have your start and select marked with minus and plus. You have a center button that brings up your Xbox menu, in my experience on Windows, or a menu that I wasn't expecting because I wasn't expecting it to work with this OS, but it did later, which was Bazite. That was pretty cool. You have a profile selection button, which lets you go through custom profiles that you can load onto this thing through the 8BitDo software, and you have the 8BitDo specific buttons, including the star one, which, like I mentioned, lets you rotate through your LED settings, and the square, which lets you set your macros without having to use the 8BitDo software. Just to go on a tangent here for a minute, by the way, I love the fact that 8BitDo lets you do macro programming without having to download a piece of software. Like, so many different controllers, keyboards, even mice require you to download a program onto your computer. It's going to ask you to log into the company so that they can have a profile with you, so that they can track your data and do all this random crap. 8BitDo lets you program macros without ever actually having to touch their software, and I really appreciate that. So, good on you. But yeah, so basically you can hold down on this button as well as the button that you want to set to a macro, and then once the light is flashing, you hit the macro you want to program it to, and there you go. So if you want to use these little inner buttons, which are between the triggers and the bumpers, you can set those as, I don't know, shifters in Forza. You can also program, of course, these little guys back here, which are your macros that I always find kind of awkward to use, but they're there. And frankly, as little as I use macros, it is super cool that you can do that right on the controller. Or if you do want to touch the software, you can set different macros in profiles and then switch between them with, like I mentioned, the profile button. Now, once you have your macros set, once you've got your profiles loaded, once you have your LED rings set exactly how you want them, what kind of technology is this using that makes it so special, that makes it into the ultimate 2? Well, there's a couple different ones. Let's start with the joysticks, because like I said, we'll talk about them later, and well, later is now. So starting with the joysticks, I mentioned earlier that these were very smooth, and one of the reasons for that is because these are TMR joysticks. Now, you're probably familiar with Hall Effects joysticks. These are basically Hall Effects, but better in every way. Here's what I mean. Hall Effects joysticks were already better than what you would find in something like a traditional Xbox or PlayStation controller, because those traditional joysticks use potentiometers with pieces that move against one another and they'll eventually wear out, whereas Hall Effects use magnetism, and that is going to have fewer moving parts, less things rubbing against one another, and they last much longer. However, they also use a lot of power. In fact, one of my favorite Hall Effects controllers is a wired controller. TMR joysticks, on the other hand, still use magnetic fields, but also quantum tunneling and some other gobbledygook I didn't quite understand to basically get you a more power efficient, more accurate, and more sensitive version of Hall Effects. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. Extreme sensitivity and responsiveness and accuracy, but also power efficient enough that you're not going to be burning through batteries like crazy. I was trying to find a good example that helped explain the differences between a traditional joystick controller and one of these, and the best example I found was my first car versus my car now. Follow me on this. My first car was a 2001 Plymouth Neon with a 5-speed manual, and the shifter linkage on the 5-speed was so worn out that it was like stirring chili to go between gears. Like, you could tell when you were in a gear, but it really didn't feel like it until you let out the clutch and were like, oh, I'm in gear, good. It was really bad. The feel was kind of there, but it wasn't as responsive, it wasn't as tight, so you just kind of got used to it. Skip forward ahead to my current car, and I have a Fiesta ST with shifter linkages that are much tighter, have way better tolerances, and getting between gears is like a toggle switch. There is no play, there's no question of whether you're in gear, it is responsive, you know where you are, that is it. That, as a car guy, was my best way of explaining the differences between a non-TMR controller system and a TMR controller system. Anyway, that's enough car nerd talk for now. The point is, these joysticks are extremely responsive, extremely tight, and I actually noticed that when I was going to aim in a video game, I was overcompensating because I knew that that delay was coming, but there was no delay. So that little bit of dead space that you get on a traditional controller, it's just not there. So you almost have to retrain yourself to not hold the joystick as long when you're aiming, otherwise you'll overshoot your target, because as soon as you move that joystick, your character's moving. And something that I said we'll talk about later also plays into that. Now, moving on to the triggers, these are where you can actually implement Hall Effects, and it's not going to be ideally as power hungry since it's only reading a linear direction and not a full joystick rotation. These are extremely accurate and extremely sensitive triggers. Like, when I play Forza Horizon 5, I can just pull in on the trigger and I'll see the brake lights come on my car. It is wild. And the other cool trick is that these have little switches in the back, so you can turn them from very sensitive, very accurate triggers to hair triggers. And I don't know if they do the same method as what Xbox does, where it basically just blocks how far back the triggers go, but it almost feels like there's buttons underneath. I'm not sure if that's how it's working or not, but either way, it's a really, really cool feeling to be able to go from these long, very accurate trigger pulls to quick clicks for shooters. Now, the last input method that I really didn't test, if I'm completely honest, because I don't use it in anything to begin with, is a 6-axis gyro function. You can turn it on and you can set it up for something where, like, if you pull the trigger, you can kind of tip the controller around and it'll move the joystick, or move the joystick in software. But I have never been a fan of motion controls for shooting. I've turned it off on the Switch. I've really never used it in anything, even on the PlayStation when they had 6-axis on the PS3. So, like, if you're into that, it's there, but it's just not something I've really used. Now, all of that input functionality is really cool, but it doesn't make a difference unless you can get that data over to whatever device you're playing on, and that's where the wireless functions and wired functions come in. Yes, there are multiple ways that you can connect this thing to whatever device you're trying to connect to. You can do wired if you want to do wired, no shame in it. You can do Bluetooth, or you can do the 2.4 gigahertz dongle. It's kind of dealer's choice. You can also switch between your wireless connections through this little switch on the back to go between 2.4 gigahertz and Bluetooth. And if you have your dongle on your computer and you have another device paired up over Bluetooth, it will just seamlessly hop back and forth with that little switch. When it comes to compatibility, this thing is officially able to connect to Windows or Android, so that's a bit of a downer for me because I can't connect it to my MacBook or my iPhone or my Apple TV, which I know that sounds weird, but I have actually played quite a few Apple Arcade games over on the Apple TV, and it would have been nice to be able to pair this, but unfortunately, you can't. Unofficially though, or at least not listed on their website, this thing pairs up by Bluetooth and by 2.4 gigahertz dongle with Bazzite Linux, which by extension I would assume means it can also do that with SteamOS, although I haven't tested that, so don't take my word for it. Maybe try it on your own if you get one of these and you have a Steam Deck. But yeah, I've been primarily using this on my ROG Ally with Bazzite installed, so when I plug my ROG Ally into my TV, I lay down on my bed, I just turn this thing on and it connects via Bluetooth and I just start playing. But like I said, I also tested this with the 2.4 gigahertz dongle and it worked perfectly fine. I was genuinely impressed. So while unfortunately there is no macOS, iOS, or tvOS support, which for an Apple guy like me is a bit of a bummer, it is able to run on all of the gaming things that I would normally use, that being my PC and my ROG Ally. Now, when it comes to wireless connections, I know there are going to be people out there who, even as good as the wireless can be on devices, they're going to want to wire this in. And yes, you can absolutely do that. There's a USB-C port on top, plug the cable, plug it into your device, you're done. Bluetooth, yeah, your latency argument might be kind of fair. This is actually not as bad as some other Bluetooth devices I've used, but it's still there. However, listen to this next part about 2.4 gigahertz before you decide whether or not you want to go straight wired or give wireless a try. This is easily the most responsive, lowest latency wireless connection I have ever seen. Now, 8BitDo claims that it is a less than 1 millisecond response time. I'm willing to say probably not in most cases. However, looking at this slow-mo, it is pretty damn close to instant. So as much as I would say use wired if you are that sensitive to latency, this 2.4 gigahertz dongle is no joke. It is an extremely low latency experience, and I was playing things like Mario, allegedly, and a couple other things, and it was extremely, extremely responsive on platformers, and in general just never really felt like there were any issues with input, pause, movement on game. Really good. So with all those things combined, hopefully you understand why in the title I said that this controller is almost perfect. Triggers, fantastic. Joysticks, chef's kiss. Nice tactile buttons and bumpers. The D-pad is great. Everything about it is really good, minus a couple downsides. We've already touched on a few of them, but there is one that I've been consistent about, and I gotta bring it up here. As much as I love this convenient charging solution with the dock, I have to point out that this does not have a user swappable battery pack of any kind. You can technically swap it, I guess, if you take the whole thing apart, which according to one of my shorts, more people are okay with than I thought, but their Pro 2 controller, for example, actually has a rechargeable battery pack under a door. You can take that battery pack out, swap in a new one if you want, or swap in AA's. I will always advocate for that kind of battery pack in a controller instead of sealing it inside the case. But again, a lot of people in my short where I talked about it seemed to generally not care, so maybe I'm in the minority here. You let me know. And for me, that right there is the last downside for this controller. Everything else about this thing is fantastic. Now, what does it cost? Because yes, 8BitDo sent this to me. Thank you, 8BitDo. But this thing is a $60 controller. Now, to be fair, when 8BitDo sent this to me, they mentioned that the website is going to have a clickable 10% discount, and they're also going along with Prime Day and discounting most of their products from 15 to 25%. So you can use that if you want to, but I'm not one of their salesmen. I'm going to review this thing and ask if this is worth $60 because discounts are great, but they're not always going to be there. So if you're buying this thing at full price, is it worth it? I mean, in my opinion, especially looking at the competition, yeah, I would say so. I mean, this thing has Hall effects triggers, TMR joysticks, you've got an extremely tactile D-pad and face set of buttons, you've got customizable macros, it comes with a dock and a dongle that is the fastest 2.4 gigahertz dongle I've really ever used, and you have customizable LED rings on it. Like, yes, I would absolutely say it's worth it, especially when you look at the competition. Like, let's take a look. Like the Xbox Elite Core, for example, that thing has macros on the back that you can't access because it doesn't come with the paddles. You got to buy those separately. It doesn't come with a dock. It is exclusively Bluetooth unless you're using it with an Xbox, then it's 2.4 gigahertz, or if you buy the 2.4 gigahertz dongle separately for some reason. The joysticks have the swappable top gimmick going for them, so you can change out the feel of the thumbstick tops, but they're not TMR, they're not even Hall effects, so it doesn't really matter if you swap the tops if your joysticks are drifting. To their credit, the triggers are Hall effects. They do feel pretty nice, so you get one of the features that this has, or I guess two, because you can pair it over Bluetooth. But again, no dock, no dongle, no TMR joysticks, and it's $140. And then, of course, because I have to make fun of Nintendo, the Pro 2 controller is, well, nowhere close to this. Like, they have buttons where the triggers are supposed to be, and no, Nintendo fanboys, don't call them triggers. These, where they move in a long range, those are triggers. These are buttons. You have buttons shaped like triggers. You also have the thumbsticks that this has in a way, although Nintendo uses this weird lined texture instead of a knurled texture. I don't know why, but yeah, your joysticks are fine. But for $85.99 or $84.99, compared to this, where you get a dock, a dongle, all of the features I've mentioned, yeah, still not a good value. So even disregarding the fact that 8BitDo sent this to me, I would pay my own money for this. I would pay $60. If it's on sale, which again, it's supposed to be here on Prime Day and currently, if they were telling me correctly, this is a great value controller for everything you get. Either way, if you're looking for a controller and your budget's around 60 bucks, this is a really hard value to beat because you've got really good triggers, some of the best joysticks I've used, a great D-pad for platformers, all kinds of stuff. Definitely one that I can recommend if you're looking for a controller in this price range. And of course, the dock, the multiple options for connectivity, it's all there. So definitely a controller that I can recommend. Either way though, that's been it. Thank you so much for watching. Huge thanks to 8BitDo for sending me this controller. It was really fun to review, even though for some of the times that I was using it to play games, I probably should have been packing since I'm going to be moving soon, but either way, thanks for sending the controller over. I did send an idea their way for something else I want to try, and hopefully they'll get back and we'll see how that goes, but I don't want to spoil what it is yet. But if you do want to see what it is, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. Leave a like so that way we can see that you actually enjoy this kind of content. And if you really enjoy this content, you can also become a member for $2.99 a month, get a whole bunch of different perks, and your name right there with the other people that you see right now. I put it in post, so I don't know how many other people have joined yet, so I just say those people there. But again, that's been it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Thank you so much for being here, and have a good one.